Good morning. I'm Hiba Casas, the head of secretariat for the Principles for Inclusive Peace initiative at Interpeace. It's my pleasure to brief you today about a very exciting and important initiative, the Principles for Inclusive Peace initiative. I will start with the why. The imperative for this initiative is very much founded and lies in recent trends. Just a second, I'm just trying to make sure that you can see my slides. I think you should see the slides now. Just asking the moderator if we have confirmation that the slides are up. Okay, seems we have a technical problem. Just 1 second. Okay, I think now we can see the slides. Can we? Great. Sorry about that. Technology is always an interesting challenge. So I was saying that I would start with the why, and the imperative for this initiative lies in recent trends in conflict and peace. What we have been seeing in the past few decades is increasing violence and fewer successful peace agreements. The world is at its least peaceful. There is no denying of that. Since the end of the Cold War, we have active conflicts in 52 countries. 1 in 45 people in the world are in need of humanitarian assistance today, one of the highest figures in decades, and vulnerability has been increasing year after year. And this trend has been going right up, and if the current trends continue, we will have over 200 million people in need of humanitarian assistance by 2022. And what we know is that conflict has been one of the key drivers for humanitarian imperative, and the human cost of conflict has been enormous. As we face a big crisis as well with COVID-19, causing the largest economic slowdown in modern history, what we can only expect is that the situation will get even worse. Another troubling statistic, which lies behind the thinking of this project, is the durability of peace, the trends around that. What we know is that 90% of the active conflicts during the 2000s were initiated in countries that had already experienced a civil war. What this statistic underlines is the fact that there is a persistent trend around the international peacemaking and peace-building action over the last 60 years, that a large number of peace processes that were initiated to resolve these historic conflicts have been successful in reaching what we can describe as temporary cessation of violence, but they have not been successful in sustaining peace since we see this relapse. So if we go deeper into some of the fundamental flaws with the current approach to peace processes, we could perhaps cluster them in 5 or 6 factors. The first one relates to short-termism. What we have seen time and time again is that the urgent trumps the important. Too often, peace processes are centered around the very important and urgent task of short-term milestones on halting immediate violence. But what we cannot deny that this is indeed a priority. However, if this is not balanced with a focus on the end desired state of sustainable peace and what we need to get there and how we should build the capacities of societies to deal with conflict so we don't have this relapse, then there's a significant shortcoming there. And this trend that we were talking about, countries falling in conflict in the past 2 decades, in countries experiencing civil war, stands true in the case of Yemen, Sudan, DRC, Sierra Leone. We can go on and on in terms of examples. The second fundamental flaw centers around the issue of the quick fixes to the international community's approach. What we often see in different countries is that we do not go deep enough to address the roots of and root causes of grievances. Many of the conflicts we are witnessing today are transmutations of old conflicts. They are Conflict just manifests itself at different times and evolves. But in a way, there is a strong historical and deep-rootedness to what we see in terms of conflict. Peace processes that leave the historical roots or past grievances unaddressed and are solely focused on the quick fixes often lead to recurring conflicts. And we have a few of these examples playing out right now in different parts of the world. The other issue with the quick fixes is that it also does not address the question around the political economy of conflict and the vested interest by various actors in upholding its stability. In the 140 different peace processes globally between the 1990 and 2015, what we have seen is that less than 1% of these agreements aim to solve conflict substantively and comprehensively. And this is an issue. The third fundamental flaw is around our methodological approach to peace processes that tends to place a heavy and disproportionate emphasis on the idea of reaching an agreement at the table. While evidently this is really important, it's only one stage or one part of a larger objective and system of interventions that ought to guide a peace process. One can argue that negotiation table models, if not balanced, often can create elite-dominated power-sharing arrangements where the only way to ensure a seat at the table is through violence, which could also incentivize those who do not enjoy the spoils of power to return to violence to regain a place at the negotiation table. And some argue that this is the case of South Sudan. The fourth parallel fundamental flaw is the lack of real inclusivity and local ownership. Peace processes are often externally driven, whether by UN or non-UN actors. They often fail to engage all the relevant elite actors, let alone reach the very important constituencies of women, of youth, other marginalized parts of the societies. But what we see is that even with the normative progress in terms of inclusion and the commitment in the Women, Peace and Security agenda and Youth and Peace and Security agenda, the agenda of inclusion is still dominated by tokenism, and we have not reached the level of strategic inclusion in looking at all the relevant actors to the different processes and how we significantly and ensure that they are engaged in these processes. And a very exclusive process results in the situation that it's not anchored in local ownership. Whose peace are we talking about? How is it responding to the aspirations and the lived experiences of people and what they would like peace to deliver to them? And the fifth problem is around lack of implementation and oversight. It is rather troubling that only when we look at peace agreements, only 2/3 of them, we could say, are implemented, but more than a third is not implemented. And I think Mali is a case in point where 80% of the commitments made in the 2015 Accords are yet to be fulfilled and completed. And perhaps I could move to the next slide. So if we keep these flaws and fundamental flaws that we've talked about clear, and we consider that the fact that these fundamental flaws have long been widely understood and acknowledged in the policy space, and most of the practitioners recognize these flaws. The issue is that despite years of investment and a lot of research and a very significant body of evidence, we are not seeing a shift. A second factor is that the nature of conflict has been changing, yet our approach and the formal peace processes and security architecture and adjoining normative frameworks that had regulated the way conflicts are resolved has in fact not dramatically changed in the past 50 years, despite the plethora of the UN reform processes and a lot of commitment there. So there are some challenges which create this urgency and imperative for action, but despite these serious challenges, there are still durable pockets of global political will. There is a window of opportunity. And the UN Sustaining Peace Agenda and the related Security Council resolution provide a critical political will which can be captured and built on for greater international, national, and local efforts towards moving in the right direction in the peace agenda. So the time is now. We need new energy, we need new momentum to bring the sector to rethink and recalibrate our approach to peace. And this thinking is what led to the Principles for Inclusive Peace initiative. What the initiative is about, really, it's about a collective effort that brings the whole sector together towards a fundamental rethink of how peace is understood and achieved, towards more inclusive and sustainable peace. And what we have identified as our three main objectives are what you see in front of you on the screen. The first one is that frame of reference. That frame of reference that we can reach through the development of new sets of international principles and formal norms, but principles that are developed through the launch of a global participatory and inclusive process. These principles are meant to better enable local, national, and international actors to craft more inclusive peace processes that result in long-term sustainable peace, but to provide a frame of reference, which we are lacking right now in this sector. The initiative is also designed in a way to generate momentum for greater accountability and change the incentives of national and international actors engaged in peacemaking and peace-building interventions. So we can address some of the fundamental flaws around lack of implementation and oversight, and also some of the limitations that we see manifesting in the international community's toolbox, which has not evolved enough and has been heavily mandate-driven. So these three objectives are rather ambitious. They do provide an opportunity for the sector, as a sector, the whole sector of the Peace Caucus, but beyond that, to come together towards these objectives. But essentially, this initiative is not a business as usual initiative. It is designed in a way that will be a joint collaboration, broadly participatory, an effort of, as I mentioned, of the sector as a whole. But its ambition is underpinned by a strategy that combines both evidence, realpolitik, and real society. And I will tell you more about the four main building blocks of this initiative, of how it's going to work towards achievement of its objectives. Firstly, we believe that for the process, a participatory process that would lead to the development of this international frame of reference in the Principles for Inclusive Peace, we need strong thought leadership and advocacy. We need a body that is able to engage both with all power institutions, but amplify the voices of communities and citizens and create that bridge in order to develop this frame of reference that responds to their aspirations and lived experience. And that thought leadership will be provided by an independent international commission of eminent figures who will focus global political engagement and amplify these voices and lived experience and aspirations. What we are looking at here is not a traditional commission. We are not looking at a group of wise men and women coming together to come up with a report. What we are looking at is a listening commission that will anchor its work in evidence, but also in lived experience and a very strong foundation, which is the bottom-up process, participatory process. And just to unpack this process, I will show you another slide, just describes the approach. This bottom-up grassroots process will combine two levels of engagement. The first level of engagement is using an action research methodology of grassroots and on-the-ground consultations with organizations who are engaging in this space, whether peace-building organizations, women's organizations, youth organizations, community organizations, who will be engaging in a process of consultation that would feed into the work of the International Commission and the development of the principles. We will be using appreciative inquiry approach with a unity of approach, but we recognize that these kind of interventions often bring together the organizations that we have access to. So that one layer of consultations is very important, but we feel that we need to go one layer deeper of moving beyond the usual suspects and ensuring that we find modalities of capturing and engage and triggering mass engagement in terms of reaching the voices of the citizens, what they are expecting, what they are hoping, what are their hopes and expectations and dreams around peace processes, and try and channel that into the work of the Commission through very local campaign, going as local as possible and bringing that at the global level in a synthesis exercise that would feed into the work of the commissions. So the ambition is that, of course, this will also feed into and lay the foundation through this very participatory process that brings the partnership of the sector to build enough momentum to lay foundations for greater accountability and incentives. In terms of where we are right now, just a few points in terms of this approach of collective effort. We are going to operate within this initiative with a multi-stakeholder forum, which is currently under establishment. The secretariat that is hosted at Interpeace is a secretariat that is mandated to work with the different organizations of the sector and build as broad network of organizations as possible, both to serve as a sounding board to the work of the Commission to inform that, but also to capture the level of wisdom and research and evidence that exists already in this sector, but also to partner with the organizations to reach their broad networks of running the local consultations, amplifying the local voices, and laying foundations for future accountability. So the multi-stakeholder forum essentially fulfills a number of functions and provides that platform to bring different organizations on board. I'm very heartened to report that while we launched in the past 3 months, we have now 19 organizations, both international and some local organizations who are joining us in the stakeholder platform, and some organizations who are joining us in conducting some of the country consultations and other components. And this is very important because, as I mentioned, to reach the impact that the sector is desiring, we need to be able to move into this collective effort. We have also a steering committee that brings together the State Secretary of Sweden and who are a big supporter of this initiative from its infancy, together with the Minister of Peace in Ethiopia and the President of Interpeace, who provide also input to and strategic direction to the process. In terms of the country consultations that I've mentioned to you earlier, we have plans to run consultations in 42 countries, which you can see online. And again, these are done in partnership. In terms of where we are right now, we are launching country consultations in 10 countries, and we're very proud to be partnering with Search for Common Grounds and very soon with International Alert for some of the initial country consultations. And of course, the Center for Humanitarian Dialogue and other organizations and some of the local organizations which we will be partnering with in different countries are coming on board to conduct some of these local consultations as well. In terms of plans for thematic research as well, the idea in this initiative, as I mentioned, is to build on the important wisdom and research capacity that exists in this sector, not to reinvent the wheel, but to see how we could distill knowledge from that. But if there are certain gaps that the Commission identifies, we will be partnering with different organizations to fulfill this gap. And we have very good discussions already on joining forces and building on some of the important work that, for example, USIP is doing in this space, or other organizations like IPI, Center for Humanitarian Dialogue, the Graduate Institute, and others who have really invested a lot of time and resources in this space. But we will also be partnering with a number of local organizations who will also run the different case studies in their countries. Right now, we have initiated a number of case studies, which are actually done by different research institutes in these different countries that you can see on the screen. But the idea here is that this initial set of case studies is to animate what the key issues and the lessons learned that we've seen, and to allow that to be a starting point for the discussion of the International Commission based on reality and evidence coming from the different countries. In terms of our current supporters, in terms of member states support and donors, the government of Sweden has been a big supporter of this initiative from the idea stage. The government of Denmark as well. The government of Switzerland is also a political supporter of the initiative. And we also have the support and funding from the Robert Bosch Foundation. Ongoing outreach for political support. There's interest from an additional 8 countries who are looking at both potentially supporting politically the initiative in terms of the work of the Commission, but also to see how we could anchor this and link it to efforts of incoming members of the Security Council and other member states who are engaged in this agenda in terms of bringing also greater strength to the agenda of multilateralism and UN reform. So this is the key findings, key summary of our initiative, and I very much look forward to your contributions. I can already see that there's some questions coming in, so I will be taking them one by one and attempting to do that. We have, I think, 9 minutes left in order to finish this pitch, so we will use this time. So the first question, I will read it to you. So the first question is saying, peace processes unfortunately often include the so-called stabilization democracy dilemma, when countries who try to ensure peace prefer stability over democratization to avoid short-term instability caused by democratization processes. What is, in your opinion, is more important to ensure long-lasting peace? Institutional stabilization or democratization of countries? Well, thank you very much for this question. The fundamental principle, I think, is how do we go as international community in supporting, of course, the efforts of a country to move towards a situation where peace is actually lasting. Of course, and this is the usual dilemma which we see, where the international machinery and the toolbox of the international community gets deployed. So you see the same kind of stabilization plans in country A, in country B, in country X. You see the same humanitarian response plans in country A, B, C, and D. The same happens across how the different machinery deploys. And big part of this problem actually is less political and more around practical considerations. And I worked within the humanitarian peace and security and both in the field and in headquarters and for 16 years in the UN. And the way the machinery deploys is very much mandate driven. So, so there are very specific scriptures that we follow from one country to another, whether they work in country A or do not work in country B. We tend to still deploy the same methodology. So the issue is that the approach to stabilization is very much mandate-driven rather than problem-driven. I can't give one general answer to this question. It's going to depend from one country to another. The different paces of how democracy will be realized in one country to another will differ. And we've seen it firsthand when we assume, for example, immediately in the case of Libya, and I recall being part of scenario planning around that within an interagency group. And I recall the discussions around planning for the elections, the 100 days plan, which we deploy in one country or another, but in a country where there has not been an election in 42 years, where the whole dynamic and definition of democracy is very different, we need to rethink our approach of how we push a certain agenda. I'm not talking about not being principled and not working towards democratization, but it's understanding how can we anchor that in local ownership, building momentum, making it around more of a homegrown movement, while the international community can play a very important role in pushing the agenda in the right direction. Another question here. There's a question around whether we are working with pre-existing institutions such as the African governance architecture or African peace and security architecture, who are dealing with peace issues related to boundaries, armed groups. We have just concluded a mapping exercise. We've launched as a secretariat just 3 months ago, and we've just concluded a mapping exercise which identified over 42 regional and local networks and organizations and mechanisms which relate to this, and we have every intention to engage. Of course, it's going to be very important for us to engage as well with regional organizations who are actually playing an increasing role in mediation, and also local organizations. So we have every intention to link up and work with these different organizations. There are more questions, I think, than we can answer right now, but I'm going to try to do what I can. There's a question around the results of the consultations. Will these be made public, and to what extent? All of the documents that will feed into the work of the Commission will be made public. What we are developing right now is actually a platform and a website which will go live in the coming 2 months. And within that website, there will be a space where you will see all the reports that will come from the different consultations. Beside the reports, there will also be a space where we actually post the guidance note of how to run these local consultations, because any organization that would like to run a consultation, would like to provide a report on outcomes in their country with their constituency to feed and inform the work of the Commission, will have the opportunity to do that. Again, this is an idea of creating an enabling collective effort, and our role as a secretariat will be to engage with all organizations who have the interest to engage. There will also be an opportunity for different organizations to join the stakeholder platform and to feed into the process. So yes, everything will be made public, and we would very much invite different organizations to join forces with us in this exercise. I see here also, well, how has the COVID-19 crisis impacted peace processes? And I'm just getting a note that we have 3 minutes left. So perhaps we take this question and we will be stopping. I mean, I think we could, of course, the COVID-19 has brought such a significant crunch on the international system. I think one of the key dilemmas that it's posing are around the models of mediation in terms of actual peace processes, because you no longer can bring people together and do some of the more discrete outreach, which often is done by actors or facilitators from different countries or from neighboring countries or at the global level. And I think it's putting to test our approach to mediation in a way. But also what we're seeing right now, I think, is how COVID-19 is acting as a conflict multiplier. And it's very interesting to see how the quick fixes are being proposed right now in a couple of countries that we are seeing in the news at the moment, and watching how the very traditional peace processes that are ongoing, or let's not call them peace processes, let's call them political processes are playing out, and to what degree would they hold and last. So with this, I realize that our time has come to an end. It's been a real pleasure to have this opportunity to participate. Thank you very much for taking the time to join us online today, and thank you very much for all your questions. And this, I would use this platform as an opportunity to launch an invitation for different organizations who are interested to be in touch, because we would be very keen to have you as partners and strong contributors to this process. Thank you very much, and have a good day.